Hello, hello, and welcome to another episode with Trust with Maya Z. As usual, Maya, but this time, unusual guest in my podcast, Paul Sims from Impatient Health. Why unusual? Actually, Paul is quite popular, like in the clinical research space. But Paul works not just in clinical research, but let's say entire life sciences, healthcare. Um, Paul is actually I knew Paul from his years from I for Pharma, but now he's heading in patient health, and I'm receiving this amazing every single time emails with the top actually subject lines that I have to say, and always like super to the point and providing lots of insights. And I decided to invite Paul because, as you all know, I'm very passionate about the patients and beyond the buzzwords. And I know Paul shares the same passion. So, Paul, first of all, welcome. Thank you for
Thank you, Maya.
accepting my invitation. And
Mhm.
yeah, can you tell us actually a little bit more about yourself before we start with some interesting questions?
Sure, Maya. I hate introducing myself, but I'll try. I'm a guy who has been working in this industry a long time and gets very frustrated and bored, quite simply. I think that we could be doing so much better than we are doing as an industry. And my motivation is simply trying to close that gap between what patients want us to be and what we are today. And I believe that in many ways we don't know what we don't know. And it's my job to sort of bring new ideas, new possibilities, new alternative futures to our industry.
Yeah, and just so that like we understand your background within patient health, you are consulting the life sciences organizations about like how they can be better and how they can be more aligned with with the patient's reality, right?
Yeah, exactly. We're trying to make pharma more ambitious, more creative, more
Nice.
patient-oriented. That's sort of the three things that I really want to bring to our industry. And we do some consulting, we do some research, and of course, many people know we do quite a lot of events of different types as well.
Yeah, and I know your events are always like great. Paul, so my question to you is, since you're observing the space for quite some time and trying to bridge patients, life sciences, how far away are these, like, are life sciences from patients?
I wish I could measure it in light years, but it's basically too far. It's too far. If we were biologists and we drew like a phylogenetic tree of, the different species as they kind of broaden out in a kind of flowchart, um, I would argue that pharma is still much more towards kind of the single-celled amoeba we are still. I mean, it was only a few years ago. You wouldn't even know which pharma company you were in if you didn't see the logo on the front door because they were all so similar. And we are all just unable to actually think outside the box very much. So I think that the future, and evolution works in biology, but it also works in business. The exact same theory works perfectly well. It is actually inevitable that we form different species as we go
Hmm.
forward, just like biology has, that we adapt ourselves to different patient habitats, if you like. The only question is how long? How long does it take to
Hmm.
get there? So it's inevitable, but it's not inevitable that it happens in our lifetimes, shall we say, Maya? So I
Okay.
feel that my motivation is to just ultimately speed up this evolution if I can. And if you're a biologist, you wanted to speed up evolution, you want to add more kind of mutation pressure, as what a biologist would say. So that you saw what happened in COVID, of course, as
Yeah.
the drug, as the virus mutated, it became more virulent. And so I'm trying to do a positive version of that, give people more mutations, more
Yeah.
alternatives, and then hopefully we'll evolve more quickly.
Well, I have so many questions now, but like, I want to understand because you've been in the space for quite some time, and I guess you're also trying to measure progress. So, what do you base your opinion that there is a huge gap? How do you measure that there is a huge distance between life sciences and patients' reality?
Well, I don't think I need a large ruler. I think I just need to
Okay.
ask myself, are we healthcare? Is pharma healthcare? No.
Mm.
Pharma is pharma, and healthcare is healthcare. And there's a big gap between the two. I often argue pharma is full of very intelligent people who only know how to do one thing, very narrowly focused, which is developing drugs. And of course, the big problem is pharma only knows how to get paid for developing drugs. So we are obviously obsessed with the product life cycle. Our investors are obsessed with the product life cycle. There's no point in talking to them about being patient-centric or whatever it is. We have been unable to find either partners or value outside of R&D. It really upsets me that those people outside of drug discovery, which is most people, they don't even see themselves as the creators of value. We almost call the innovators of pharma are the scientists who are putting lotions and potions together in the lab. Everyone else is, I don't know what, a distributor, a developer, a something else, but some kind of lesser thing that doesn't imply that there's any other source of value outside of drug discovery. And that's just obviously untrue. There's so many things that we could do. I mean, as I say, I don't need a ruler. It just needs a bit of imagination. It doesn't even need imagination. It just needs looking at other industries. Look how other industries consider themselves to be innovators all through the pipeline, end to end. And yes, the pharma pipeline is a bit longer than average. I get that. But it does not. Some would argue that gives us more opportunity, not less, to be innovators. So,
Yeah. Now you kind of gave me a new idea. Is it fair to say that, because you're absolutely right, and thanks for the analogy with biology, but also biology and science teaches us that evolution comes from competition. So is it fair to say that not that great of a competition is actually what holds us back? Because in other industries, you can tell that you can create like shorter cycles for creating products, shorter sales cycles, and all sorts of things. So this let's say this evolves into better products, better value proposition. But maybe in life sciences, that's not the case. What are your observations?
Yeah, I think some people think pharma is very competitive, but we're competitive in our drug discovery. We're not competitive very many other places. And another way of saying what you're saying is necessity is the mother of invention. If you need to invent, you will. And pharma doesn't, people ask me, why hasn't pharma been more innovative? The answer is because we never had to, if we're totally honest with ourselves. We have been a profitable, successful, comfortable industry where people can achieve an above average salary and a long career without really having to risk too much. So I am very welcoming of competition, and competition doesn't just come from your rival company with a drug close to you. Competition comes from the IRA scheme in the US, which puts additional price pressure. And that, for me, maybe someone would argue I'm even anti-pharma for saying this, but ironically, on a one-to-one level, I find most people agree. I welcome that pressure. We need to light that burning platform. we need that pressure. We need to not get comfortable. And the problem is that the vast majority of people in our industry are very comfortable. I know that we've probably lost more jobs in the last year or two than any time in the last decade in our companies, but I would still argue, despite that this is a very comfortable, insulated industry that never really had to listen to the patient before. Never really had to. And the more that we can make that essential, like in the same way that we run clinical trials, you can't launch a drug without clinical trials, you shouldn't be able to launch a drug without consulting patients either. It should be that fundamental. We shouldn't even have to have your podcast, Maya, as wonderful as it is. We shouldn't even be having to talk about it. It should just be a natural part of the process that doesn't rely on passion. It just relies on us following the core of what we have to do. So
interesting. So what holds us back from exactly speaking with the patients, consulting with the patients? What do you think holds us back? Is it this pressure that you mentioned, or is it to do with more processes or regulations, or these are just excuses?
Well, a lack of pressure for sure. I would also argue it's too expensive and too slow right now. And I'm not innocent on this. My company does patient engagement, and we charge money for that. but it takes too long. I want patient engagement to be agile, and agile is one of those overused words in our industry, so I apologize. But by agile, I mean more responsive. Most people think agile means quicker. It's not true. Agile means more cognizant of the reality of your situation and more adaptable to that reality. So what we need is for patients to be there, quite simply, like, on the meeting table. And we need to be able to rapidly digest their responses and reactions to what we propose, and we need to adapt accordingly. That's agility. That's what exists. And we all talk about agility now in the context of a digital world that we live in, where agility can be way quicker because you can instantly get people's opinions, reactions, etc., and pivot or persevere accordingly. That's what every entrepreneur in the world, it's what you probably have to be able to do, Maya. But pharmaceutical industry has yet to conquer this, despite talking about it for the last 5 years at least. And if we can make patient engagement responsive and easy so that everyone can do it without having to consult with a central unit within their company that then takes months and RFPs and thousands of dollars to recruit even a couple of patients to just hear their opinions, that's just no way to do anything. Imagine, Maya, it took you 6 months to hear an opinion from your customers when you launched a product. Could you operate in that environment? I don't think you could.
Thank you for this question, Paul. Thank you for this question, because actually in this simple question is exactly what's happening. Like, if you can't get feedback on your products while you're thinking and iterating, how do you even move forward? And the only reason you can move forward is because you have the luxury thinking there are plenty of customers, plenty of sick people. Eventually we'll get there. Actually, I'll bring you back to what you said about these RFPs and all the procedures and so on and so forth. Isn't that again one more excuse? Or actually people just don't change that simply because they don't feel the pressure need of consulting with patients?
Yeah, exactly. The bar is so low. People think that a patient-centered or patient-oriented clinical trial is one where you consulted a couple of patients at one point, maybe in phase 1, and you're now in phase 3. Not good enough. And if you were truly uninsulated, your business would likely fail because you haven't sought that feedback. Now, I don't believe, by the way, I'm actually not a big believer in market research. I don't believe that we should be asking our customers or patients what they want and then just blindly saying yes and following them. I think that we should take it on ourselves as pharma companies or any company to engage our brains to think of the best solution that we can, and then take it to the patient or customer and get that feedback and response and learn from that. So it's up to us to innovate, propose, and of course no destruction of the scientific integrity of a trial, obviously. But we need to then take that. I think of it a bit like the car industry makes these concept cars. You can't buy one, you can't even drive one, but you get shown one. At least to the sort of enthusiasts that go to car shows and stuff, they get to see these things, and it's the response that teaches us what to do. So none of your consumers or customers could ever conceive of that crazy car in the first place, but they can certainly react to it. They can go, oh my God, I hate that. Oh my God, I love that. Oh, I like that bit of it. That is what we can do with patients. That's agility. The other industry that does this really well is fashion. Again, another B2C industry. You see those crazy catwalks. You look at them and you think, how can someone even wear such a thing, let alone buy it? And ironically, you can't buy it. But all the mainstream designers, when the eyes of the world are on Paris Fashion Week or Milan or New York or wherever it is, that's the stuff they choose to put down the catwalk. Are they mad? No, what they're doing is they are proposing an idea, looking at the reaction to that idea, and then they make their sort of ready-to-wear collection. They make their mainstream collection. So it's that initial boldness and then listening. I just got the order a bit wrong. So
Oh
this is,
wow.
yeah.
I honestly, you've just opened my eyes for these catwalks. Like honestly, I was one of these people that was like, "Are you kidding me? Why do you even go to these places?" But you just opened my eyes because you're absolutely right. And in the startup world, tech startup world, let's put it that way, we call that MVP. Create an MVP, minimal viable product that you show to the world. You start getting feedback so that you then create minimal lovable product and you follow your vision until you actually, and so on and so forth. So thank you so much about explaining that with the passion.
Why
Like you
can't,
just,
why can't, yeah, why can't we create a minimum viable clinical trial, an MVCT? Maybe that's the next
yeah,
acronym we need.
okay.
Um,
Okay, actually, why, speaking about why, do you think that it's the role of the, like, what do you think is the role of the regulators here?
I think the regulators are not doing a terrible job. I know that they're often seen as the obstacle, but they are actually progressive, especially the FDA and
Yeah.
increasingly the EMA. I don't know. Think of like AI is obviously all the rage right now, and everyone from even from Elon Musk to Sam Altman to everyone is calling for more regulation. We can't do without it. We don't want a free for all. It's actually a way for us to gain trust with our organizations, with our customers and institutions and stakeholders. We need those regulations. Do I think that the regulators could be a little bit more future focused? Yes. Do they have a very hard job in doing that? Yes. I'm not sure I'd like to be doing that job. I I don't want to use regulations as an excuse, Maya. I think that it's a little bit too easy for us to blame regulations. As I said, necessity is the mother of innovation. Also, regulations are not static. What I hate is when people complain about regulations, but they don't do anything about changing them. Elon Musk famously speaks directly to regulators on a very frequent basis. He will literally call them up and say, I think your rules are bad because ABC and they need to be changed. You may have seen that he's just been appointed as the co-head of a new department of government efficiency in the American administration. And whether you think that's a good idea or not, I do think that the force for reducing regulation is a very rare one. Like in history, the only thing that got rid of laws and regulations were wars, right? And we
Yeah.
don't really want to encourage too many of those. So we need some other counterbalancing force that is going to kind of clear the air and create new regulatory environments that keep up with the modern day. So
I was
in
more thinking
principle,
about
I
the
agree.
opposite actually. Like I was more thinking about the opposite pole. Like for example, you have all these, like for example, after COVID, we had the guideline for decentralized clinical trials,
Yeah.
like guideline for diversity, like but like guideline. Oh, so okay, one thing is guideline, another thing is recommendation and expectation requirement. And you mentioned just earlier that the bar is too low, like just few patients across multiple phases of a clinical trial. What if let's try to imagine that FDA comes up with a regulation saying from now on I want you, if you are looking to recruit 100 patients, you have to be speaking to at least 15% like of that amount, for example, with patients before you even can start your clinical trial. I mean, what would happen? And do you think that would have rather a positive or rather negative effect?
Oh, well, obviously, immediately everyone would scream and shout in pharma and say it's not necessary because we already understand and we already do these things. And, you know, frankly, if you already do them, then why is it such a big deal? I would love to see a regulation like that on at least a temporary basis because I think that it would create that kind of movement and evolution that we need. I actually think it's a regulation that wouldn't necessarily need to exist for all of time. I realize most regulations tend to stay, but I do think that there needs to be a market force there if we're not going to get it from competition, if we're not going to get it from the voices of patients themselves, who of course increasingly are becoming louder and great, right? We want more of that as well. I don't know, it's a bit like politics. You have to hold your politicians to account and they have to debate new laws in public at length before they are allowed to become laws. Why? Because they need that scrutiny. They need that transparency to actually be able to put a law into reality that could potentially have some negative repercussions as well as the intended positive ones. The person who invented the car also invented the traffic jam. We don't always see the negatives when we're
True.
trying to be positive. So you need to test these things. The UK, where I live, famously really suffered in our health system when they tried to put waiting list targets on all of the operations happening in the UK. And suddenly people started to game the system, right? They did anything to reduce the waiting list, but then loads of other things started to fall apart. So you don't want, this law to stop a law to stop a law, this kind of just gradual lawification. That's a new word, that just builds up. There has to be, I think, some temporary stuff.
Experiment,
And
maybe.
of course,
Yeah.
our industry tends to self-regulate in many areas, but it's not strong enough, clearly.
The reason I'm asking this question is because I was thinking about something you said again earlier, that like pharma is not connected to healthcare. But now I'm opening a very big topic, so probably we'll need another episode for this topic. But
Sure.
honestly, Paul, I think that my observations is that even healthcare is not healthcare. It's more of a sick care.
Yeah.
So even the requirements of the market, if we define the market as the let's say the insurance companies and the governmental institutions that are reimbursing drugs, if they have the wrong mechanisms to incentivize pharma, bring me more relevant and more value-based products, why would the pharma do that, right? I mean, it doesn't make any sense. So actually, yes, that's it's a question like to you. Do you think healthcare is actually doing a good job to request from pharma to do a better job and maybe get them out of their comfort zone?
Yeah. Well, obviously, depending on your country, healthcare has
Okay.
many, many issues. We've talked about value-based healthcare, if I can kind of hint that that's what you're going towards. We've talked about that for 15 years, probably, at this point. And it's been very hard to make a reality because some of the practicalities are very difficult. The actual holding of account is an expensive and difficult thing to do. And ironically, as pharma tries to bring in new therapies, it also almost tries to bring in new standards of care, new metrics almost. And how do you measure someone that's brought in a new metric system? So it's almost anti-innovation in some ways. Value-based care is something we could easily spend a whole hour talking about.
Yeah.
I'll be honest with you, I don't know what the right answer is when it comes to value-based healthcare. I think that pharma companies need to not just propose that that is a way in which they could be rewarded, and there has to be a downside as well as an upside, of course. But I think they also need to work out how it can be managed better. It needs to be a system innovation, not just a product innovation. You can't just say, here's my wonderful new drug, and here are the various things that you should do, healthcare system, to determine if it's going to be successful or not. I think you have to propose a system level innovation. Another reason why, exactly as I said at the beginning of this conversation, those of us who work outside of drug discovery have just as much mandate to create innovations, find value, find new ways of working than those in drug discovery. And we are so blind to the possibilities of what exists out there. And by the way, I don't blame people for that blindness, because the problem is that the jobs, just fitting in with the rails is 90% of their job. And, getting time to look outside, think broadly, actually invest in new things is very, very hard to do. Not an excuse, but we need that pressure to make it more important that we do things differently.
Speaking about system innovation, wasn't that exactly what companies try to do with implementing digital health? And what happened with digital health? Yeah.
Very good point. I was actually just reading something from someone who I'm sure you know, Paul Tunner, this morning, saying that he reckons we are now on the slope of enlightenment, coming out of that trough on digital health. So there's hope towards that plateau of productivity that is coming. I haven't read his work yet, so we'll have to see how.
Please send it over, and I'm gonna share that with the rest of the audience as well.
I'm sure he'll be very happy. But digital health, No one's actually ever asked that very obvious question to me before. It is something that we all hoped, we all wished would have been a lot easier than it has been. We all lament the difficulties and the lack of, the misplaced ambition and the hope that the new digital world that was sort of egged on by the pandemic would usher in a new era. And now, of course, it's hard for companies to even get funding, let alone take their products through to market. There, I have to say, regulators, I think we have to put a little bit of blame at the regulators. Heads.
Interesting. Why?
Well, most of them haven't innovated to enable these products to be approved. It's not easy. Digital health products by definition change in the same way that all your apps need to be refreshed every week on your phone for some bizarre reason. Our health apps need refreshment, and we haven't got a regulatory system that copes with that very well. We haven't got a sort of that agility that I was talking about is very difficult to do with regulators. So I would like to have seen some new systems, and I do think that a lot of people put a lot of effort in to try and find new ways of making these things work. Here, I think it's quite simply a failure of collaboration and perhaps some of that system thinking that we were talking about before, to be able to work in concert with national or international regulators and actually figure out the best path forward. Because theoretically, a lot of these digital health apps, particularly in areas like mental health, they could have such a big effect and such a huge reduction in cost and such a preventative effect on healthcare in general. I don't think any of us are not convinced about that. It's a real shame. It's a real shame that it's been so hard. It's a real shame that I've seen such talent, some incredible talent, almost feeling like it's gone to waste in our industry. I feel very sad for those who logically put everything into this path and then found it so difficult. I can only hope that we basically have created enough of a fire in the building, and we've burnt down through just the huge problems everyone's had to be able to now look for more solution-oriented ways forward.
More adoption, in a way. Interesting what you're saying, Paul. Honestly, for the first time, actually, I hear someone saying that regulators are kind of a bottleneck for adopting these digital health solutions. I understand, by the way, what you're saying, and indeed, there is lots of back and forth on data sharing, communicating management, lots of these things. My observations are more on the user experience part of these digital health solutions. So, how much actually pharma does understand? Because you are correct. Like, pharma is expert in drug development. Drug development is very different compared to creating an app and creating a user experience that people like and will adopt and so on and so forth. So isn't that also something that kind of prevented from building this system?
Yeah. I'm very lucky to get invited to speak at a lot of pharma internal meetings. And a question I often look at my audience and I ask the question, how many of you are experts in behavioral science? And maybe one hand goes up in a room of several hundred people. It's not very many. And it's an extrapolation of what I said earlier. We know how to do the chemistry with labs. We don't know how to do the chemistry with people. We basically ignore behavioral science and think that clinical science is the most important thing. It's ironic, actually, that we all know about the placebo effect. We all know that, that's a genuine phenomenon and we actually cater for it in our trials. Yet somehow we forget about it outside of the trial environment when we're actually trying to create an effect, because that placebo effect can be a useful tool sometimes even. I think it is absolutely crazy, utterly crazy that we don't invest more in behavioral science. Again, I would say it's partly regulators and partly the system that doesn't necessarily pave the way for us to invest in those things and make it so important that we have to. I would like to think that those working in digital health products of different types are more in tune with user experience, behavioral science, the human side of it. we are still undoubtedly behind the curve compared to the average.
So, Pharma, if you're listening to us, suggestion: invest in behavioral scientists
Yeah.
alongside the other scientists, or make sure that you educate your teams in behavioral science. I think that we just made a huge advertisement to a lot of different universities, like providing this course, but like 100% Poe. I have one last question, and this time is more on the patient side of things. Can patients do more? Are Can they do that, or like are they capable of actually raising more noise, kind of like demanding to be heard, what they can do like to do that? And when I say patients, I don't only speak about lay patients, I speak about the patients communities. Is there anything they can do to demand this better attention?
Um, in my first Pharmageddon event that I ran last year, October last year, the first panel of that session was, of course, a patient-oriented panel. Start with why, start with the patient. And a patient who you might know, Carol Scrafton, who normally is in a
Ah, yeah,
wheelchair,
of course.
who raised herself from the wheelchair and stood up and said, "I hate patient-centricity." It was a patient saying that. She says that she felt like a zoo animal. She felt like she was constantly being stared at and observed in a slightly creepy way. And it was such a shame that her skills as a peer, as opposed to some kind of test subject, were going to waste. And I'm not saying that co-creation is appropriate in every situation, but most definitely we need to think of patients as peers and agents of their own future in many ways. We need to give them that agency to be able to do that. And patients themselves need to be welcomed in. You asked me, could patients be doing more? That's a very strange question. It's a bit like saying, should customers do more? It's not patients' responsibility to figure out what the future should look like. Very few people, and you can study Clay Christensen, Harvard professor who wrote The Innovators Dilemma. You can study his teachings, and you can learn very quickly that most customers are unable to think beyond the short term, unable to decide what they actually want, unable to really do your job for you, unless you work with them as a peer in their kind of environment, and unless you do what we talked about earlier, propose ideas and get those reactions. Have them on the same meeting table as you, for sure. Do I expect patients to be able to do more? That's a tricky question. I do think they will when they're given the opportunity, and I don't think Pharma gives them the opportunity to do so. I don't think Pharma welcomes them in. I think Pharma uses them as a token tick box in most cases, and that is derogatory. It's not very good. I don't think it's going to get us very far. We'll be found out. I don't know why people think that, ticking that box is a good thing. We'll get found out. We've already found out. We're not an authentic industry. We don't, live by what we say. And people see through that. People distrust us. So plenty of work to do, I would say.
Yeah. Well, if I'm to summarize, we need more pressure one way or another. Regulators also listen to us, but not only regulators, just pressure, new way of thinking, like trying to really maybe like educate us in other ways, like the behavioral science that was like super interesting, and systems innovation. That's the other thing that I will definitely take away from me. Any final thoughts on you, Paul? It's been an absolutely amazing conversation.
When you said pressure a second ago, it made me think of the word stress. We tend to think of the word stress as a negative word, but in reality there's two types of stress. There's distress, which is when you can't control what's going on, and it's a very unpleasant emotion to experience. And there's eustress, EUSTRESS, which is the sort of stress that you might bring upon yourself as an entrepreneur, Maya. It's almost a positive stress. It's the stress of wanting to do better, and almost stress that you give yourself and welcome because it helps you achieve more. So when you say this word pressure, some of us might think, oh God, all I wanted to do was have a nice career and go on vacation and send my kids to a nice school and be able to retire at the age of 58, whatever it is that they want to do. But actually, the most rewarding thing, and we all know it, We all know it's just in the same way that going and doing exercise can feel good afterwards. Some of that eustress, some of that pressure is definitely a good thing, something that we should welcome. And it doesn't have to be negative every time.
And I can just add to that, maybe sometimes we shouldn't wait for someone to put this stress on us, but we should be proactively looking for this stress, because we want to be appreciated as individuals and doing something that has impact. I have zero doubts that there are probably very few people in the world that just don't want to be useful, right, and helpful. I mean, you have to be something's wrong definitely with you. So maybe also take the individual responsibility to own this problem and try to make a change even in your own work if you can't impact others.
Mutate yourself, as we spoke about at the very beginning. Absolutely.
Yeah. Paul, thank you so much for this conversation. I learned lots of things, including the fashion industry. So it's been a great pleasure.
Me, I mean, look at me. You don't have to tell anyone anything about the fashion industry. I mean, geez, that's
But it was a great pleasure. Thank you so much, Paul, and good luck with everything you're doing and convincing Pharma.
No problem. And Maya, same to you. You are a force for good in our industry, so I love that you have this podcast, despite what I said earlier. Please keep up the great work.
Sure. You bet. Bye-bye, Paul.
We'll speak soon. Thanks.